It's a cocktail for disaster. That's true.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Israel here, and I'm joined by a special guest, Preity. Did I say your name right? Is it Preity? How do you pronounce it?
Namaste, everyone. Namaste, Israel. Yes, you did. It's Preity Upala.
How are you doing this lovely evening?
I'm doing very well. I'm in beautiful sunny California. It's raining outside, but I'm warm and cozy inside, and it's still a beautiful day. It's clear, and hopefully, when all of this is done, I'll be able to go for a walk later.
There you go. Always on the positive side of things, right? With all this negativity happening around us.
Absolutely. In fact, this is the time when you are meant to really go inward. And I wrote an article not that long ago where I said this is the perfect time for contemplation and the inner journey and focus on you, because ultimately we're all on this journey alone. On the spiritual journey, we are by ourselves, and it's a long and lonely path. So this is sort of an outward manifestation, I think, of that inner journey. So all you can do is go within, be grateful, have gratitude, be kind to yourself, be kind to others, try to be compassionate to everything around you, because there's not much you can do, but you can exercise these amazing qualities that we have and we don't use enough, I think. So a catastrophe like this often lets us do that. It gives us space to do that, and I'm seeing it in different ways around the world, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely think that that's happening. So I figured we could just kind of get into these stories, now that
Yeah.
we're kind of getting into this and people are trickling in. So obviously, would you consider yourself an expert with like Indian relations, or you participate in that kind of field, right?
Absolutely. So, as a geopolitical analyst and a kind of a political editor, because I write for various outlets, I write about many things, but I focus on international affairs and how sort of countries relate to each other, and how the polity relates and affects each other and the world at large. I'm not that concerned, or my focus isn't US domestic politics. It's really what's going on internationally and how that affects the US and also the world at large. And especially the Middle East and sort of subcontinent issues, especially US India relations. I keep a close eye on what's going on in that part of the world, because when you talk about 1.3 billion people in India alone, and I think the whole region, when you look at subcontinent, it's about 2 billion. I think that's a big deal. So whatever happens there does affect the world, even though here we might think it's far away and it's so far removed from us. It's not, and it's only going to get the influence, I think, of Asia is only going to get greater. The In the next few decades, it's going to be India and China that are the two superpowers. And I think this virus situation is a perfect example of how these two powers are different, and how the world needs to really acknowledge that, because they say that on paper. Even the US always says, oh yeah, India, they're our most loyal and greatest ally, and China is the bad actor. But when you look at foreign policy, when you look at actions, you think, are you serious about that? Because I don't think you're treating India as a proper friend or ally. And with China, you have better trade relationships with China than you do with India. So I think there needs to be sort of a recalibration of who your true friends are and who your true enemies are politically.
Yeah, you bring up an excellent point. So let's definitely get into that, because with Trump's recent trip to India, it kind of outlines what American foreign policy is starting to shape up to be. So, yeah, let's talk about this geopolitical situation, right? Because with the coronavirus, kind
Yes.
of making its way across all the continents, you're starting to see which countries are handling it best. I think right now people really are looking towards like South Korea as a model, but um, talk to us about how India has been handling this, and then we can get back to the geopolitical thing, right?
Oh,
Closer to the American politics. But how is India handling the coronavirus situation as opposed to what's happened in China, what we've seen in Italy? Go ahead.
absolutely. Great point. I think the world really should be looking at India, even more than South Korea, on how to contain this for a multitude of reasons. So I think India is the largest country in the world that has been affected the least with this virus. So we have 1.3 billion people, and we have had four deaths. Four deaths.
Yeah, it's
That's
a lot of people, and that's a small ratio.
nothing. And even those people, I believe one or two of them were people that were affected from another country that came in. It never sort of originated in India, or it wasn't some Indian person who sort of caught it. So the government of India, I must say, has been spectacular in dealing with this.
Yeah, what
Firstly,
measures has the government taken? Talk to us about that.
so the all the major airports in India, especially the Delhi International Airport, which I would say is the largest and the busiest, and it is just phenomenal. It's basically testing every single person, and it has been doing this for at least a month since the very beginning of as soon as they heard about something, they got on it. And because of that, they were able to contain it. They were able to separate people. Recently, I think, since a week or so, they completely shut down the borders. And
So
that
let me ask you a question. Why do you think the U.S. hasn't reacted as swiftly as countries like India? Is it just the way that India's kind of system is set up where they're able to kind of turn the ship faster than the Americans are? I know that, we have kind of a privatized system here. Can you speak to that? What made India's government different
I
as far as
I think
reaction?
so. It's two things. It's one thing is the government itself, which is actually very prepared. People think that India is very unorganized and chaotic, or this and that. I actually disagree. I think it's actually there's a lot of order in amongst the chaos. So it's actually a country where everything actually works. It's a system that works despite what it appears to be. And I would say that when you look at America or some of these European countries, especially Europe, it looks all very organized, but actually it's not, because I think at some point, Europeans and maybe even the US, they just took a lot of things for granted, and they just think that they have the might and the resources to deal with anything. I think they sort of got ahead of themselves, and they haven't been hit with huge catastrophes like this. So when it does happen, they're unable to do what they need to do. I think the government of India, time and time again, has shown how swift they've been. They get on it. Even though
How honest is the data that's coming out? I know
they're
China's having a difficult
China,
time, with their PR and
yeah,
people
so it,
wondering if it's, if there's something more here. What about India?
no, I would say in the case of China, absolutely, I wouldn't trust a word that comes out of their government. So all of these figures with the deaths and the infections and all the measures are with the not just the WHO, the World Health Organization, but other international organizations. We don't gain anything by making these things up. And with such a big country, we actually want these numbers to be real. We're not living in Maya or in La La Land. I think we're a very, very pragmatic country. And as a people, we're very serious and very pragmatic. That's the nature of India. It's always been like that. And I think it's actually a good thing. Whereas other
Yeah, I
countries,
feel
they sort of
so.
take things for granted. So the government has been swift with testing, with containment. So just about, I think, 10 days ago, they completely locked the borders. Nobody is allowed in and out of the country. It seems a little exaggerated considering we only have had
Yeah, I
four
feel like
deaths.
some of those things would be contested here in the United States just because the way a lot of people value kind of their independence and freedom and, liberty stuff.
I'm a,
And we're
but
seeing that happen in the US. What about India? How's the reaction there?
I think people. So the second element to why they've been so successful at sort of really containing this. One is the government, one is the leadership. The second is the people themselves. Indian people they are so patriotic and nationalistic, and they will do whatever it takes for the betterment of the country. And India is all about sacrifice, about self-sacrifice. It's all about seva. It's about the other. It's about the land, right? So each person will always give in to the betterment for the majority of people. And we've seen this in the freedom movement, where people were more than happy to lay their lives down so that the country can gain independence. And that's very much a story that sort of flows through the entire sort of story and history, civilizational
Right.
history of India. So the people have
Well,
been good. They've been doing whatever the government has been telling them.
yeah.
They are free people inside. They're doing this out of respect and love for the
Yeah,
country. So
it
today,
becomes more nuanced when you're talking about people's health, right? As
yes,
far as like the
and
liberties and trying to get
the
order
one,
back.
absolutely, the one thing that I think Indian people will not tolerate is taking away of freedom and liberties, because they fought for this. The whole, so many people fought for this and millions of people died. So that's, and democracy is something that we take very seriously. So we will do whatever it takes. And because there is a genuine health crisis, although it's questionable why got leaked out and why it is how big it is today. But at the end of the day, there's a problem at hand and we have to deal with it. So they're thinking solutions. So today is actually very historic because the Prime Minister of India had put out a message. It was pretty much an order for the whole country that at 5 p.m. today they all stand up and I mean, most, it's kind of everybody is indoors. All the shops and schools are closed. However, at 5 p.m. as a country, the all 1.3 billion people will clap. And I think if you have a conch or something, you can, sort of blow that, or if you have some thali or something like that, you can just drum it.
Right.
But
Kind
they
of
want
a solidarity thing.
solidarity thing, not for each other, for the forces, for the army, military forces, and also for the fighters, the health professionals who are out there, sort of containing, testing, doing what they need to do, and for the police security forces. So this is as a respect to them, and
How
we have seen a
right.
million videos on YouTube. You must look it up, where politicians, celebrities, everyone, even great critics of the prime minister, everybody's applauding this. And at 5 p.m., they all did it. They all did it without fail. I think that's the most respectful thing I've ever seen the country do. And it's just incredible that this is a country that can come together at a time of crisis and think beyond each other and do what's needed. That is fantastic because
Yeah,
very few.
let me shift the conversation to manufacturing. Do you think, because I know India is becoming a pretty robust economy,
Yes,
and so a lot of that, do you think, has to do with just a lot of in-house? I've seen that most successful countries that are dealing with this has have some kind of um, you know manufacturing still left in their country, some kind of manufacturing industry left. Here in the United States, we don't have any of that. So
that
it's hard for us to get masks and stuff like that. How is India handling that? Has it always had like national manufacturing in house rather than kind of exported?
That's a very good point. The economy is solid, and it's the fastest growing economy in the world. Of course, has been for probably the last 5 years or so. We are actually not a manufacturing hub in the world. We're not like China or Taiwan or even Vietnam now. So that's interesting because it's a huge country, and we do produce a lot of things. We export a lot of things, but much of that is either military things or produce, sugar, wheat, tobacco, and all that. It's not, we don't make things so much. It's only recently when we're seeing like Samsung and some of the tech companies move to have production in India. So India is not a manufacturing hub. So the good thing is, also when manufacturing gets affected, it doesn't affect this country because they're not dependent on that. We have, whether it's technology or services, I think it's really more a service industry. And really, it's a brain drain situation where you get such smart people who do things around the world. And also, it's a tech startup sort of capital of the world. So there's a lot of entrepreneurs, there's a lot of people producing apps and companies and service companies, not so much like things, like China does. So, but we've started getting into military manufacturing, like jackets and bullets and all sorts of parts for tanks and missiles, which is great because that we can export to actually all around the world. So now we are even exporting to Germans. The German military is ordering things from India. That's phenomenal because they're known for precision. So for them to put out these big orders from Indian companies to get different parts for their whatever missiles and our I guess arms, that's a pretty that's a great testament. I think some of the masks are still coming from China or came from China, but the other reason is we have a young population. 75% is under the age of 30. So this particular virus, I think it affects aging populations more. And China and Italy and Iran have a large chunk of their populations actually aging. It's over 40, over 50. So that helped. And also the Ayurvedic
Right. Just
lifestyle.
statistically, that helped because older people are more prone to getting the virus.
True. It's sort of, I mean, we have a lot of old people too, but it's just that 75% under 30, that's really good. So we have a hip, young, dynamic, mobile, hardworking, big chunk of the population. That's why
Hmm.
our next 40, 50 years are going to be fabulous. Whereas you look at China, most of their population is over 50. They're looking ahead for the age of humiliation coming up. And they know this. They know this all too well. They probably have only a decade left to really make their mark, and after that it's just going to be a country full of old men, and there's no country for old men out there. So and they know this, and then they're very antagonistic towards India
Well, it
because
also seems like India and China also have some kind of rivalry, to because they're
yeah,
the next two countries that are coming up, as superpowers, and they're also, amongst the largest population, right? Like globally
absolutely.
speaking.
So absolutely, you make a great point. So it's a myth that China thinks that the US is its greatest competitor. It's not. It's actually India, because in Asia, which is the home for China, right? That's its home turf, let's say.
Hmm.
It's not the kingpin. There is another power called India, which on many levels it is more successful, and it beats India. Sorry, it beats China on many many levels. Last being, I think, just public sentiment and the international community, and being a democracy and being the spiritual sort of spiritual powerhouse of the world, and just on every level, especially the soft power situation. I think India is way ahead, and China knows that. It knows that it has no friends. It knows that nobody actually likes them, except for people like Pakistan who get funding from them for terrorism. That's a different story. But
Well, they're
that's
heavily investing in those areas too,
the
as they
CPEC.
see the United States blunder over there, and how we're trying to recede more into more of a isolationist
Yes,
mentality. I
and
think India and China see an opportunity there.
yes. Well,
But
no, India is not working with the CPEC at
well, I
all. So
mean that China is making an opportunity in that
yes,
area, right?
absolutely. So the
Mhm.
BRI, which I'm shocked to hear no American, whether it's mainstream media or diplomats or nobody, no American is talking about the BRI, which is the Belt and Road Initiative, which is this Chinese imperialistic dream where
Right,
they
right. We talked
basically
about
want
that,
to
yeah.
take over the world. Essentially, it's a new Silk Road, and
Mhm.
they're basically what they're doing is they're giving these loans to Africa and places like Pakistan, and they're saying we're going to loan you out. We're basically going to come to your country and build infrastructure there. We'll lend you the money for it, and we'll get our Chinese workers to work and build this thing, and you'll be set for the new world order and blah blah blah. What they're not understanding is these loans are never going to be paid back, and
Mm.
essentially they own these countries. They've already done it in China, and they already did it in Pakistan.
Well,
So
and that would be to the detriment of China. They just have to look towards the example of the UN and Greece. What happened with Greece when they, went bankrupt, and the what is it, the World Bank or whatever,
yes,
they were saying, no, we're not gonna, or they wanted to bail them out. There was a contention between bailing them out and then just letting them leave, and then we had Brexit happen. So as we
yeah,
can tell, this kind of indebted into this like larger Chinese
the
thing.
grand
It just doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's gonna pan out in the long. Maybe in the short run, it gives them like a
I,
strategical advantage.
yeah. So it's the not just the detriment of China, it's actually the detriment of the African continent and places like Pakistan that have such a basket case economy. I mean, there is zero infrastructure there, and for them to be basically they are indebted to China forever. China owns their ass, and they already fund their terrorism and nukes and nuclear program and all that. Now they're really in bed with them, and in a way that even they don't want to be in bed with. So it's really actually detrimental to both. But this virus situation has literally left this BRI thing. It's sent it to the dogs. I mean, there's a joke that this CPEC, which is the China Pakistan Economic Corridor, It's like it's a corridor to nowhere. It's going nowhere. Even before the virus hit, it wasn't feasible. They were like way over budget. These
Right.
projects were just a pie in the sky. With this virus, there is no construction going on. No Chinese people are going anywhere, and it has completely halted everything. And I think it's going to take months, if not years, before things resume, right? So even on that level, thanks to this virus, even their little BRI dreams have been thwarted. And thank
Right.
God, because it's so sinister.
Yeah,
And
but the problem with that is that the problem I see with that is that China's, whenever China makes a big error like
yeah,
this, the world
it affects
recoils
forward.
with it. Yeah, the world goes
Yeah,
with it because it's become that
yeah,
manufacturing hub. Luckily, like you said, now there's more viability out
yeah.
there on the
There's
global
other
scene
countries,
where
I
there's
think.
more, right, there's more areas to invest in, whereas China is now kind of becoming a middle class economy where they're seeing a high rise in their middle class.
Yeah.
So they're starting to tend to that necessity in house instead of, yeah. And so yeah, maybe like you said, those projects end up going nowhere. I think that
And
they would just make that area more volatile because you'd
yes,
have Chinese interest right next door to India, in
yeah.
Pakistan, making investments, and just
It's
it gets
very,
really
I personally am thrilled that their CPEC is uh is almost unviable at this point, because the problem with the CPEC was because essentially they're building highways all the way from China to Iran, let's say, but it would go through not just parts of Pakistan, but to get to Pakistan, the highway would have to go through parts of Kashmir. Now, it would not go through the real Kashmir. It would go through this illegally occupied territory by Pakistan called POK,
mm,
and that is Indian sovereign land. So India was all prepared that if this virus hadn't happened and they were building away this highway, at some point India was going to take this matter to the International Court of Justice, to the UN, to whatever legal body they need to, because they actually have a strong case, because it's really Indian sovereign land, even according to
right.
the
Well,
UN.
it seems like the territorial stuff has to be figured out for
And
sure,
sort of
and that's going to involve all parties.
yeah, with this 370 situation, that territorial thing has been sorted. When you cut off the funding arm from Pakistan with what happened to Kashmir, and you completely integrate it into India,
Right.
plus you turn Indian government, they turned the state of Kashmir into a union territory of Kashmir. So it's really like like a Hawaii or
Right.
the,
Territory like a,
or
yeah, right.
something like that, which is it doesn't even have its own legislation, assembly,
Right.
its own like sort of elections and stuff. So it kind of took a step back where it's really under the
Was there
hands of
like a
India.
movement to say, hey, let's let these people who live in this area decide for themselves who best represents them, or does it go back more to like a historical
No,
battle of like, no, well, it belongs to India, so,
no,
and
well,
then
it
no, it
does.
belongs to
It,
Pakistan.
I think in our last conversation, I just touched on it very quickly. In 1947, uh, all the states were asked, where do you want to go, to India or Pakistan? And 99% of all the states, princely states, picked India. Only a few sort of Punjabi Muslim areas picked what became ultimately Pakistan. Kashmir was a state that actually picked India, so it legitimately and legally um, signed an instrument of accession. So it actually is an Indian state. But when it signed the accession, Pakistan couldn't handle it because it's a Muslim majority state, and it thought, "Hey, you're Muslim. The whole part of our partition is on based on religious grounds. This
Right.
is not." You can't. How can this happen? That's when they attacked Kashmir. There was a little conflict, and we did win that conflict. We took back Kashmir, except this part which is called POK, which is the illegally occupied. So even to this
Right.
day, Pakistan owns a very small part of the state of Kashmir. It's illegally occupied territory. Everybody will, even the UN will acknowledge that. And that's the part where this China was going to build the highway to get to Iran. And they can't do that anymore because it's the whole, because the Kashmir, the when it became a territory, it wasn't just the state of Kashmir that is part of India. It's also that it's all of Kashmir, which is great. But now, because of this virus, I don't think the CPEC is going anywhere. This highway is
Right.
going nowhere,
Well,
which
my
is
question is why, from the beginning, why do these countries seek out foreign investment for their infrastructure? I know the U.S. is guilty of this as well. Probably we have a big contractor problem here, where these private firms will fight out for these contracts. Usually, there's a lot of like monopoly dealings and just like a lot of
so.
waste there. But
China is very persuasive. I think they sold a dream to Africa and countries like Pakistan, saying, "Yay, we have the
has
resources. We are."
India ever done something like this? Have they ever extended an arm like this, like China did?
No, I think that
Right,
that's the
because
a
of the
huge.
tenuous history, right?
It's a huge that's a big difference between India and China. And when people compare them, just because they're big economies and the population is almost similar, I'm like, this is that shameful to compare a free, democratic society with an interest, with such a sort of spiritual civilizational history, to a totalitarian dictatorial communist country like China, with no liberty and no rights, and has imperialistic agenda. India does not. I think the
Right.
most.
So going back to that kind of geopolitical thing,
Yeah.
there's been a movement towards this like isolation stuff. What do you think the virus is doing for that? Because India is accused of being like, oh, it's too nationalist. It doesn't welcome in like secular and like diverse. The criticism is of
Yeah,
whenever a country tries to secure borders and stuff.
well, securing, but I think almost because of this virus, almost every country has done that. It's not, I mean, and certainly they've closed their borders to China. So I don't think the criticism. I mean, as far as the virus goes, that's not tenable. But the criticism comes from these people who are bigoted, the people who the anti-India nexus. I like to say, they just want to see a failing India, and at every step, at every turn, they just want to smear India for no good reason. So India is not just the largest secular democracy in the world. It's actually the only secular democracy in the world, because despite being 85% Hindu and being Hindu for 6,000 years plus, it is not, the constitution of India is not a Hindu constitution. It's
Right,
a
and it's
God
a young country, right? It's a rather young country as far as like being free.
post indep well, it's, I mean, free as in we booted
Right,
out
post like England and all that
post
stuff.
colonization. So post colonial rule, it's 73 years or something like that.
Right.
But that's not the thing. It's always been from 1947. It's been a godless secular constitution. In fact, the way that the constitution is written, it's
What
very
about the United States? It has a constitution.
uh, no, no, no. I'm saying it's the oldest. It's the only secular democracy in the world, because despite 85% following one particular religion, it constitutionally it's not of that religion. America is a Christian nation. Make no mistake about it. The idea of secularism in India is sorry. The idea of secularism in America is a separation of church and state. In India, it's not just that. It's
So
more,
India goes further than that,
it goes
is what
further
you're
than that,
saying.
where
Okay.
actually to the detriment of the majority population, it's actually saying that this country has no religious essence or identity, which I actually disagree with, because it does.
Right,
I think
Hindu.
the
Isn't it
secular,
majority Hindu?
and in fact, the secularism, openness, tolerance, and pluralism in India comes from its Hindu background. It does not come from Islam. Because when you look at Pakistan and India, it's the same people. The only difference is the religion. And one, you have a dictatorial theocracy with Sharia law, where their minorities are massacred by law and discriminated by law. And India is truly an open secular country, where you've got from 2%, the minority has gone to 20, of like, 15 plus percent, right? So, so I think when the
So
West.
I want to move on, but I did want to talk about two other things when it comes to India. So one, it's a big population, right? But like China has different customs, and I think a lot of those customs led to like the government there. I had seen something about this where they said, okay, well, these rare, animals that they keep and they consume.
Yeah.
Some of the smaller farmers took that on, and there was like a black market issue, and so the
Hmm.
government just said hands off that. We're gonna let private owners deal in that. And so why didn't you see something like that in India? Like
We don't, we
what are the standards like for like that kind of stuff?
so we don't eat dogs and cats and bats.
Right.
str- First off, and that's why there's never been a virus that has come out of India that has to do with animals in the last 100 years, let's say, whereas in China there's been plenty, right? So
Mm-hmm.
our dharmic customs and lifestyle, whether it's the namaste or it's the Ayurvedic lifestyle or being vegetarian or ahimsa, honoring animals, we've never had that problem, thank God, and that's testament to the culture and also the fact that we've kept the culture for thousands of years.
What's the
Um,
government situation like whenever these kind of things try to happen? Is there like
I,
enforcement? Like here we have the FDA, we have a lot of governmental
no, we do.
bureaucracy that.
I think it's not legal to have these exotic animals. Like you can't keep them in your backyard and stuff. We have lots of parks, we have lots of forests, we have lots of safaris and zoos and we have incredible exotic animals, birds, and so on. Right? They're famous for whether it's a tiger, elephants, or so on. So we are. I think the
Yeah.
government is everything to protect them and make sure they don't go extinct.
Is there
Uh,
like a wet market thing though in India like there is in China?
No, look, you can't compare a country like China to
Yeah,
India. I mean,
no, no.
they are
There's
like night and
definitely
day. Like
versions of
everything
wet
that they
markets
do.
though in other countries.
No, no, I know, but everything that they do, we don't. We are actually like antithetical to what they're about, right? With whether it's ahimsa or the spirituality or pluralism and the diversity and all that. But the government, thank God, and I want them to be heavy-handed in this. Beef slaughter is illegal. You cannot just kill cows. You can't kill any animal, to be honest. There was a famous actor that
Isn't
went.
that part of the Hindu? Is that part of the Hindu kind of
No, but it's
religious?
yeah, but is it, I mean, isn't that a good thing? I mean, I would say that not killing cows is a good thing. I don't see
No, I
that as a problem.
absolutely agree, but I just wanted to make that point that it seems like it's part of the religion and something that the state is pushing.
So it was that particular beef ban on beef slaughter actually happened during the Congress government. The Congress government is the Nehru Gandhi family, and they are very anti-India, very anti-Hindu, even though they ruled India for 60 years. So they actually bought that out, which is, and they are the sort of they're the opposite of the current government. I mean, though they're opposition party, they oppose each other,
Sure.
right? But it came out decades ago, and it wasn't enforced so much. But this illegal beef market is something that happens a lot in the Muslim communities in India, and it's not okay. There is a national law that it's illegal, and I think if you're a citizen of India, you have to have the decency and the courtesy to follow laws, which include not killing animals, because as a people, we certainly don't do that. Hindus certainly
Do
don't.
you feel like China should crack down more on that? Do you think it's would it be okay for like a multinational like grouping of like, hey, we don't like that this is happening. You need to crack down on this because I
Well,
feel like China gets away with so much.
you're so
It's like
right.
why aren't we cracking down and saying, hey, if you want to be a part of the global trading
Glo-
whatever, right? You got to
Yeah,
get your shit together when it comes to these wet
absolutely.
markets.
You're so
Like,
right. It's funny because it's the FATF, which is the Financial Action Task Force. It's a international organization that cracks down on money laundering and just money scams around the world. Guess who's the president of that? China. So while China is the president of the FATF, obviously it's not going to look at itself, and also it's not going to look at countries like Pakistan and some other countries that have money laundering. It's a fact, right? They have a history of that, and they have a serious problem with that. So China is really very political in a way. It sort of makes sure that it gets a seat at whether it's the Security Council or all of these UN
it
um,
reminds me a lot of Saudi Arabia and what they're able to get away with.
the human rights and stuff. And so, but China is worse because they get on these boards and all that. They've kind of,
Hmm.
even though they like to consider themselves not that political. They are
Right.
so political, and they so until they are the president, or until they're on these boards and stuff, nothing's going to happen. I think this is where Trump, who claims that this is the greatest country in the world and we are so powerful. I mean, it's on him to say the first words on this. Like, he can totally start this thing.
Well,
Why
I
don't
think
you
the
have a
problem
meeting?
is that here in the United States, we don't have any manufacturing. We don't have anything to kind of cement us home and say we're going to be okay. We don't have to rely on masks from China that are on back
But
order.
I think at some point people need to, maybe the G20, barring China, needs to come together and say we need to figure something out. So you have, all the, Australia, the US, UK, EU, India as well must be in this conversation. You need to get together and say, how can we be less dependent on China, and at the same time, how can we reprimand them for all of
Mm.
these horrible things that they do, that it's somehow the international community has nothing to say, but they want to talk about Kashmir, they want to talk about all kinds of other inconsequential things, and yet people are dying, animals are being hurt in
Right.
China, and no one cares about it.
Well,
So
I hate to say it, but here in the United States, I feel like our media and kind of our establishment is kind of
responsible.
what they're doing. No, what they're doing is they're kind of throwing this like bigotry blanket over everything and saying, "Whoa, everybody, we can't talk about this China issue because if you say anything about Chinese
Yeah,
and what their
it's racist.
situation is, you're all of a sudden prejudiced. All of a
You're
sudden, you're trying to associate the coronavirus with, you know what I mean? It becomes an identity thing."
I was so happy to see, I think it was the Republican senator, is it Cornyn? I love him. He's one of my favorite sort of lawmakers. He's like, in no uncertain terms, is he saying, this came out of China. I'm sorry, but this is not racist. We have a serious problem here. I think the last thing we want to think about is it offending a few people? I don't care who it offends. It's killing people left, right, and center. There is a problem. It came out of a certain place, and this is not the first time. This has happened multiple times because of disgusting eating and lifestyle habits. At what point do we? It's not about what time do we stop identity politics and all of this bullshit, political correctness
Right.
crap, and say what needs to be said. And also with the bigotry thing. So you don't want to be bigoted against Asian Americans and all that, but how is it okay to smear Modi? I'm just giving you an example. How is it okay to smear Tulsi and Modi and India this and Kashmir that? I mean, why is the Western media, and also the Israel thing as well, right? It's the
Yeah,
same thing,
there's.
BDS and all that. So how is it okay? Why are you
Well, I
shielding
feel
one?
like they pick and choose
They
based
pick it,
on what their agenda is and what they're, what they ultimately want to do.
and this comes from the Western lefty sort of liberal
Mm.
media, the mainstream media,
Yeah,
sadly.
and I wanted to say something about that.
Yeah.
So these are the same people, like you said, these are the same people who, are calling out people who want to associate this with China.
Yes.
And you bring up some great examples about like Tulsi and stuff, right?
Yes.
And so you're like, well, in the United States, if our beef production here, like we deregulate so much that you start getting all kinds of bad things in your meat, that's concerning, right? So you would
Yes.
call that out and you would direct your anger at where the problem's coming from,
Yeah.
which is like
Not.
these manufacturing industries that are taking these shortcuts. So
Yes.
why on a global stage would it not apply to China? And then instead of that, they put a blockade there to protect
Yeah.
them, which is like we were talking about, that bigotry wall where everything
Yes.
becomes identity. They'll say, "Don't call it the Chinese flu. Don't call it this."
Yeah.
And don't bring up the fact that there was this 33-year-old young man who was trying to warn everybody about it from
Yes.
China. So things like this. It's like the media
No,
picks this narrative.
you're absolutely right. If you're going to, this is why I despise the cultural Marxists and the far left. And I think the DNC is really going that way, because if you're going to be a fair, and if you want to protect minorities, if you're anti-racism and anti-discrimination, you need to do it across the board. You can't pick and choose your minorities, and you can't determine who is more persecuted and who is not, because this is what's happening. And they're picking, actually they're targeting the wrong groups, and the groups that actually need to be reprimanded, they're giving them a free pass. We've seen this with all the the Islamic fundamental terrorism, and now we're seeing it with China too. And it's not okay, because it also makes it you alienate a lot of people. And if you think that being like this is what Indians are just going to take it on the chin, no, they're not. I mean, they are the most educated and wealthiest ethnic group in America. Do you think that they're going to vote for you if you're so blatantly bigoted in your rhetoric, which has been, I think, with the DNC and several of their, including Bernie, I must say, but some of these
Hmm.
other lawmakers, some of the bullshit that has been coming out of their, mouths. People aren't stupid. There is a shift towards the center and towards the right, even amongst the Indian American community, because of this very reason. And in the swing states, trust me, you ain't getting their vote.
Hmm.
So, they should really think about, because all they care about is vote bank, right? Well, think about it a little deeper, because this kind of bigotry is not going to help you in the long run. And look what happened to the Labour Party in the UK. The same exact thing happened there. They went too far. They completely
And
alienated
that's
a.
exactly what happened on the Bernie campaign. That's
Yes,
something we've
yes,
been talking about here in the U.S., which I wanted to get your thoughts on because,
yes,
Tulsi Gabbard's campaign was pretty historic. She was, of Indian descent,
yes.
and
No, she's not Indian.
well,
She's
she's.
American Samoan. She's a Hindu, but she's American Samoan.
Oh, I thought she had some Indian in her though.
No, she had zero Indian. She just
You know
looks
who I'm
Indian.
thinking of?
You're thinking
Nikki
of Kamala.
Haley. Nikki Haley is Indian as well.
Nikki Haley is 100% Indian. She's Punjabi. She's a Sikh.
Hmm.
Kamala Harris is half Indian. And there are Ro Khanna is Indian. There's plenty of
Well, then it's
Indian.
funny how they associate Tulsi Gabbard with India when
Yes,
Kamala Harris was
not
closer
even
to,
Indian. And
right.
Kamala actually Indian, but because the problem is
That's
that
weird.
Kamala,
That never took off.
very weird, very weird. And Kamala she loves India. She's half Hindu.
Hmm.
She loved Modi. She loved everything. But but I think because Tulsi is not Indian, and she was a proud Hindu, there were elements in the DNC that are very Hindu phobic and very anti-India,
Right.
and they sort of pushed this. This is the Linda Sarsour types and all
I was
those
gonna get to that. That's what ties
so
to the
hard,
Bernie
so hard types.
campaign. Yeah.
Totally. So they kind of pushed it, and then the problem is with this left liberal, far left people, they're very clueless about Middle East and subcontinent politics
Well, they
and
don't
history.
bother. They don't bother
They
to
don't bother to
understand.
research. They
They're
don't
like
know.
these armchair intellectuals that just want to like.
Cozy in the cozy offices of New York Times. They want to write pieces on Kashmir when they don't speak Hindi, when they don't know anything about Indian history, when they've never been to India, and they have the audacity to lie, blatant lies, about another country's internal matter that has nothing to do with the rest of the world. They have the audacity to peddle that crap. Shame on them. And their subscription is going down so fast it's not funny. And I await the day when they are no longer an entity at all. And
I feel
they're
like the
even.
biggest problem they had was their inability to adapt and to evolve their ideologies. They've
Yes,
always had this 60s, 70s mentality of like, revolutionary politics. And
yes,
even Bernie, he kind of themed his campaign as the political
yeah,
revolution. When you have, stay at home moms, you have people who work in the middle of the country who are rooted. They have roots in their living. They're in their 40s, their 50s, and these are making up the bulk of your party too. And so
yes,
you abandon them for a radical, slice of that party, which is
yes.
kind of the
The
transgender identity rights and everything. Like those people were never going to abandon Bernie Sanders. And this is my biggest critique: is that he neglected to build the alliance with Tulsi Gabbard, Andrew Yang,
yes,
and make himself closer to moderate, right? To the moderate center. I mean, still left, still progressive. Those candidates are very progressive, but still able to identify with that working class and make it about America. And
yes.
that's something that they never did. What do you make of the whole thing and how it crumbled?
Absolutely right. I think Bernie sadly was morphing into Jeremy Corbyn 2.0, and
Mm.
the whole DNC was becoming Labour Party 2.0, which is really a just a disaster. I mean, that party is like has been decimated in the UK, and not just for anti-Semitic rhetoric, but we found out recently that they were very Hindu phobic too, and they were infiltrated with all these sort of soft jihadi elements that were pushing
Mm.
fake agendas, and they were bringing the politics of Southeast Asia into the streets of London, and in a
Yeah.
very violent way, which didn't go down with the white British people, and who knew their what the Indian British
Well, the
people
north
are about.
wasn't it like the north end of England or whatever that Jeremy Corbyn they had before, but they lost this time
Well,
around.
they lost. There were a lot of constituencies that were, it was like majority South Asian,
Mm.
and they normally voted Labour. But after this whole Kashmir shenanigans, let's say, from the Labour Party, and just the venomous rhetoric that we were hearing from the Labour leadership, I think the British Indians and the British Hindus and some Sikhs as well, they just had enough, and they swung the vote the other way, and
Yeah.
Labour lost 40 seats. That 40 seats is a lot of
Well,
seats.
what's happening is there's like this protectionist theme that
Yeah.
everybody wants across the world, and leftist parties seem inept to catch on to that and do something with it. I was watching a video from a channel called The Amazing Atheist where he broke down why he thought Bernie Sanders needed to adopt a stronger policy on the border and a stronger policy on national security. And
Yes.
it was because he said that in the Nordic region, in some Norwegian country, I don't know which one, but the party there, the left party, was basically as left or further left than Bernie, and they succeeded. And the reason he said that they succeeded was because they took on a protectionist national
Yeah.
security, agreed with their conservative parties about, like, they went even so far as to ban burqas and stuff like that. So I
No,
wouldn't advocate for that, but
I think you're talking
you get
about
what I'm
Denmark.
saying. You get what I'm
Yeah, you're
saying?
talking
Is they
about
never
Denmark.
did that.
This is so true. I think uh, I hope this is a huge learning lesson for the DNC, that you can't isolate your vote base like this. You can't alienate, and people aren't that stupid. You can't fool all of the people all of the time, which is what they were doing. And I think they took a lot of groups for granted. They probably thought, these groups, whether it's the American Jewish people or the American Indian people, they're going to vote Democratic anyway because
Mm.
that's what their where their morals are at. And but it's not the case. I think I've seen a lot of these groups, they're moving center, they're moving right even, and in fact there's a lot of candidates who are Indian American who are now running on a Republican ticket, and they're going to win. And in
Mm.
fact there are more, I think, Indians on running on Republican tickets, and that party has stay opened up to them and totally taken them in with open arms. And this
Yeah.
is not on morals and values alone, but this is on, loving the country, the patriotism. uh, National security should be the number one concern for any nation state, any country with
Right.
integrity,
Well,
territory.
what happens is kind of their intellectual arm starts
Yes.
browbeating them about how racist it is to not include X, Y, and Z minority groups or talk about this, and it's
Yeah.
like
And they
you
could
can
say,
advocate for
yes,
their well being as well. After all, they
yes,
are part of the country. Like you said,
absolutely.
there's a big Indian American population, right? There's so they all would benefit from
Yes.
something like that because Bernie Sanders would talk about this 5 years ago. He would talk about how illegal immigration, it makes wages lower, it drops wages, and so he wasn't coming at it like from Bernie Sanders. Really, you think Bernie's gonna be like wanting to kick out Mexicans? No, he said it because he's getting to the root cause.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I think sadly with the left, as instead of national security and fighting a rising China and this global fundamental religious terrorism, these are the main concerns for our planet. Instead of that, it's become healthcare. I mean, I'm sorry, but healthcare should not be the number one issue for you as a voter, and for the DNC it is. For people who vote Democrat, healthcare is, and it should not be healthcare. And also this healthcare, the situation that it's in, I mean, this is a fat, sick country. You need to take personal responsibility for eating better and working out and getting exercise and just
Well,
be a healthier
what's
human
funny
being.
about that is that we find ourselves in this situation with Corona that now even our right wing parties here are outflanking our left wing parties from the left,
And I think
because
that
now they're saying that they want to cover everybody. So
yeah,
yeah, I think you're right with the healthcare thing, because Bernie Sanders, that's one of his biggest policies, and guess what? His own Democratic Party is blocking anything in the
yes,
House to
I
happen.
noticed that. I
But you know
think
what's
Trump.
funny is that Andrew Yang and Tulsi pushing UBI. So they
Yes,
bet. I think that they bet on it right, because now we're
yes,
seeing something come to fruition, which is the right wing party in our country, in America, is at least open to some kind of UBI. So it's
absolutely.
shown its acceptability amongst everybody. So I think UBI has come out and really been the strong, winner of the policies, because Trump is advocating for it.
Yes,
Tulsi put a bill in the
yes.
House to do something emergency wise, but it's really showing its
True
yeah,
colors,
it's
let's say.
yeah,
We're seeing that the parties as they really are. I mean, yeah, Trump and his administration should be commended. This is a fantastic move. I've seen several Republican, lawmakers and senators be very sort of magnanimous about this. And in fact, they're asking for even more monies to be sent to the American people. This is fantastic. And it's shameful that you have Pelosi and Schumer
that's right.
blocking this. I mean, you just see like their agenda. What, and by the way, these guys are multimillionaires. They've done very well for themselves on,
Exactly.
through all sorts of means that people don't want to talk.
Mm-hmm.
The left doesn't want to talk about that, but they want to talk about Trump's billions, but they don't want to talk about these people's millions. And and yes, Andrew started this all. Tulsi introduced the bill, and I think it's been passed. And when we get these checks, we know who to thank, and we know who
Exactly.
not to thank. But I
Yeah.
hope, I really pray that all of this, it's very obvious to both of us. I mean, we can see things, it's crystal clear, but I feel like the Democrats and the DNC has still got this fog around its lens, and they just cannot see the truth for what it is. They will still be stubborn and hard-headed about their rhetoric, and it's all just hate Trump, get him out, orange man bad,
Yeah.
and these guys are
It's all
bad.
about power. They want power, and I think the American people can see that they're just power hungry, and they're
Yes,
unwilling to work with the Republicans when they're adopting something that comes from their left wing, from within the Democratic Party's wing. These ideas of UBI. And I think the future is going to be that. It's going to be the compromise policies that everyone seems
yes,
to coalesce around and say, that's actually makes sense. For one, if I get money, it speaks to your personal
yes,
responsibility. I am able to then do with it what I want to do, what's best for me. Every individual has needs that are different from another. So if you
that,
put the money directly in people's hands, they can decide, what do I want to use this money for? What is the most important? Where Democrats, they tend to they used to be pushing this welfare,
yes.
mentality policies, where they would
So
put incremental little barriers. Oh,
yeah,
if you make more than 75,000, well, you're screwed. You're not getting this help. And it's like you can have someone in San Bernardino or Palo Alto making 100,000, working in the valley somewhere for a tech company, and barely being able to pay rent and
yes.
needing desperately that help. So all of this little like tier systemed help is something that I hope goes away, and the Democrats
They
realize.
do everything through the lens of this sort of victimhood, persecution. Who are the ones who are most, who do we perceive is the most disadvantaged? And let's just go all out to help them. And let's, at the behest of the other groups who we think are doing quite well and don't need any assistance. And that's not how the economy works. That's not how the world works. And when you do that, you alienate people, you pit people against each other. I think the left in all around the world has, all these intersectional groups that they have, they've
Exactly.
kind of pit them against each other, and now you're seeing a lot of intra-party fighting all around the world. And you see it even in India. All of the left and the communist parties and the socialist parties all hate each other, and they realize that there's no they're not doing it, they don't care about the country, they just care about
Mm-hmm.
power. And they've realized that there are differences in their own ideologies. And in India, the Modi government is actually left of Bernie Sanders. I mean, we have the largest free healthcare system in the world, with which covers 500 million people have
Right.
access to free healthcare. But because of our sort of Sattvic lifestyle and stuff, a lot of our conditions are not lifestyle based. We don't have obesity. We don't have all these horrible conditions that, and we don't have mental health issues because, of all the spices that we have. So there's so many things that we don't suffer from that the West does just because of Ayurveda, diet, yoga, spirituality, just who we are as people. And the people who do use these healthcare facilities are, for specific conditions. And the rich, they go to private hospitals. They will happily pay whatever they need to get the best care. And we do have some of the best doctors in the world, and some of our hospitals are the best, where people from all around the world come to get cured. So that's a system that works. I'm not a fan of this blanket Medicare for all. Get rid of, if people want to pay more, they
Well,
can absolutely.
that's what the single payer plus that Tulsi
Yes,
was
that's
advocating
a
for.
good idea. And
Right,
I
because
can't stand.
you're always gonna have the private sector. Even these countries that Bernie was saying he was modeling after had some role for private health insurance to play
Yes,
there. If
because
anything, as an alleviation, right? Like you want
why
something to be able to work rapidly.
why would you burden the system when there are people who are more than happy, who prefer to pay in and pay up? I mean, people have dignity, they work hard for their money, they want the best that money can buy, which includes healthcare. They are more than happy to fork out whatever for their own, for the best.
While still paying into a national system for everybody,
Yes,
right?
and let the people who really need it
Mm.
take advantage of this. I'm shocked that the left and the DNC and the Democrats, they're clueless about economy. They're clueless about how the world works. They're clueless about like geopolitics. They don't understand what's going on in the world. And, they sort of, when this whole Iran thing happened, when they killed the general and all that, some of the rhetoric that was coming out from the left side was very, very disturbing. I've written extensively about Iran and even the killing of that general and what that really meant for the world. They sanitized everything. I was hearing things like, "Oh, we're at war with Iran. What has Trump done? We've, this Iranian group was fighting ISIS. Duh, they were a bona fide terror group. There were another jihadi group, and jihadi groups, guess what? They kill each other. They don't like each other. So ISIS isn't just fighting the West; they're fighting other jihadi groups too.
Well,
ISIS
I think the
fights Hamas.
problem, yeah, and I think the larger problem there that didn't get as much attention is the fact that it was both Republicans and Democrats who signed off on that initial policy that allowed them to do all of these kinds of things on a geopolitical scale, right? In different countries and regions. I think it
Yeah,
was the IMF, the anyways, it was something to do with the war in Iraq way long ago, and even the Democrats signed that, and that's what Trump was able to use legally
yeah,
to carry out those actions. So yes, I think I would criticize Donald Trump for what he did, but
yeah.
do I think it was an illegal thing? No, and I think
No,
it goes back
and
to because they passed those ridiculous
it
policies in
goes
the beginning.
it goes beyond just the law. I think the left is deeming. I think it looks at Iran as some persecuted state. It's not. It does support terrorism in the region. Let's not forget about it. I would say that all the Middle Eastern countries support terrorism in the region. They're all just as bad. And what Iran was doing, and what this particular general was doing in places like Iraq and Yemen and so on, having these sectarian proxy wars and stuff, that's against it's illegal, it's inhuman. He had blood on his hands. They had
What do
killed
you
American people.
what do you make of the Russians trying to create some kind of peace between the Iranians and Saudi Arabians, or opening up talks there?
I think that
Because
Russia has no
yeah,
place to be a mediator. I think they got enough. They're just like China, but they're not as overt. So I think that they should just stick to their own country. And it's messed up. Why don't you fix your own problems? Like maybe get more people out of poverty and maybe open up the system, and not be so communist instead of bothering. Now, I must say, as an Indian, India and Russia are they're allies and they have been forever.
yeah, I was
So
gonna say India's an ally
I
of Russia.
fought for Russia. I don't look at Russia the same way that I would China. And even Iran, we have a long civilizational history. So some of these rogue actors, we have our own independent relationship with them,
Mm,
which is fine. We're allowed to do that, and they never
right.
hurt us, you
Well,
know. But
there's this oil thing breaking out. That's why I bring up Russia, because
yeah,
we're seeing them and the Saudis or OPEC, they're going into this oil war. And
you
people are trying to say that helps the consumer, but then also there's a lot of companies
yeah, no, it's a bit tricky.
who hurt.
You
Yeah.
know, like India used to get 80% of its oil, and 60% of that was crude oil. It used to get it from Iran until not that long ago. But it's only very recently, in the last sort of year or so, that that changed. And I don't know what to make of that. I think in some ways it's getting it from other Gulf countries, and it's actually America is supplying it with some of these energy needs, right? So it's kind of getting closer to America in that way, which is always a good thing. But then you think, is it wise to sort of just cut off all ties with Iran? Because these are energy ties that we've had for long, long time. But then they're getting up to all sorts of nonsense. And then when you have this Ayatollah commenting on whether it's Kashmir or all this stuff, like we don't need to hear that from them, right? I mean, they should just focus on the persecuted minorities, I think, in their country, which are plenty, instead of commenting on a responsible, sensible, moral country like India that is going to do things that are right for its citizens and for its borders and for its territorial integrity.
Well, we
Right.
talked about Donald Trump's relationship with India and Modi. How do you see the election in November now that Joe Biden seems to be the inevitable nominee for the Democrats? How do you see that race playing out? I guess we can end on that note. And yeah, how do you see it all happening? Does India prefer a Biden? How would India react to
That's
that?
that's an interesting point. I think if it was Bernie that was the nominee from the other side, we would have seen a I think you would have seen a huge chunk of Indian Americans or Hindu Americans not voting Democrat. Definitely, I think it would be sizable. So, firstly, in 2016, I think I was one of the few people that predicted that Trump was going to win twice. I said he's going to get two terms, and for the last 2 years, I have been vocally saying he's going to win. It's even before these Democratic debates started, when there were like 18 people, and there was a lot of energy in with the DNC, and they said we can put up someone. And they just kept saying Trump is so awful. Surely no smart American is going to vote for him again. But I've been saying for 2 years, no. The way that the global trend is, and I've written about this recently, just the momentum and the traits and the trends that are happening globally also happen here in America, and the world just wants a Trump. America is just going to vote for a Trump, and also when the economy is doing well,
Well, I
the
think you should
incumbent.
also mention that the mainstream media is more hated than Trump.
Yes,
So
yes,
when you
they're helping Trump, because
right,
the
you're
more
helping him because the
Trump,
more people see you criticize him, right,
yes,
the more they feel
he's
like he's doing something.
yes, and when he genuinely has done a lot of good things and they continue to smear him, people are not that stupid. And you have a lot of people kind of in the middle that are, really going right now. So I think even despite Biden or Bernie, I think even before the debates, even without the virus and all that, I think Trump, it was going to be a Trump victory. I predict that right now. I just sent an article in to my editor saying the reasons why he's going to win. And I'm going to get this published 6 months before the elections, because when it happens, I can say, hey, this was
Right.
predicted by me months
Well, I
ago.
think that the battle's going to be between the liberals who bought into
Yes,
the MSNBC,
yes,
CNN narrative,
yes,
the black community who's very
yes,
much strongly a big part of the Democratic Party, how
true.
afraid they are of a second Trump term. So I think it's going to be that crowd, right? I mean, those
Well,
kind
it's,
of liberal
yeah,
people
because now
versus the MAGA crowd,
well,
versus
you
how
have
strong the MAGA crowd is still.
which, by the way, they're very strong. So this, if it was Bernie, then you would have this progressive faction that would come
Right.
out.
Yeah, you
Now
could
with
have had the young people come out
I
in the
don't think
general.
I don't think progressives will come out to vote for Biden. I
I don't
think
think so. I think it's starting to look like they're going to stay home or do something
sit it
else.
out. They will sit it out, and or they will. You might have. I know a lot of people who are kind of in the middle that are actually going to vote right. You asked me about Indian Americans. I think Bernie would have been that he was more of a question mark. I think he was more of a contentious issue. Biden, I think they don't have a problem with him. Obama was a huge, he loved India, he loved Modi. And so Biden also obviously went to India with Obama, right?
Yeah,
He
I
also
think either way, I think India is
issue
set to have a decent relationship with the U.S.
think the Trump bromance with Modi is stronger than the Biden bromance with Modi ever could be. So I think there's still you're going to see a lot of I think Indian Americans that vote right. I think that they normally vote 70% Democrat. I think you're going to see that fall to 60 or less, and I think that's a good thing. I think we as a group have been taken for granted for too long a time, considering we're the most educated and the wealthiest. We also need a seat at the table, and you can't screw us at the behest of other groups just because they're a bigger vote bank, which is what the DNC was doing. So that's quite offensive. I find that very offensive. And we contribute to the economy. We are model citizens. You shouldn't be screwing us in that way and disrespecting us. So they are waking up. They will see. They would prefer to vote. And I must say, a Trump government will be better for India than a Biden government. It just will, just because of the policies, I think, and also I think the Republicans and Trump in particular, he's going to be big on things like the fight against the global jihad movement, counterterrorism, this his travel ban. All these things are problems that we in India face too. So I think we would prefer policies, the U.S. foreign policy, to kind of be molded around those lines more. I think we
Right.
would feel more comfortable saying that at least this guy, even if he doesn't do it, at least he's calling out on that. At least he's giving that kind of terrorism a name, which Obama didn't. And it was disgusting that he didn't call out the Islamic terrorism when that's what it was. But
So
Trump
you're
does.
betting your money on the Trump administration
Oh,
and that
absolutely.
coalition to see this crisis through to
Yeah,
November and recover and
he
be able
will
to
win.
pull off a win.
And
It's gonna all depend on how this turns out, right?
I think the virus only helps him because he's incumbent. People
Especially if
also
he gives out the emergency UBI.
these checks, everyone is like, you kidding me?
You gave me
Everybody's
money,
gonna,
right? Yeah,
and it's funny. It's like, those people who say things like, not my president. Well, are they gonna say not my president when they're cashing the checks?
right.
No, right? I mean, this is the hypocrisy on the left.
Well, that's
When
why I
it's
said that Trump's gonna run from the left with
yes,
Biden because he's gonna be
that,
able to. I can already tell he's gonna be able
yeah,
to
and
blame the
also,
Democrats because they blocked your money.
absolutely, I was gonna
They
give you
tried to
money.
send you money, right? Yeah.
Also, already Trump's team was getting their hands warm, waiting to jump on Hunter Biden and that little fiasco, because that is despicable and appalling. Talk about corruption on the highest levels, and just that is not okay. That is not what this DNC pretends that it runs on. Um, how is that okay? That is like fodder waiting to happen. So I think
Yeah, that'll be a big problem for
destroyed
Biden. Yeah.
Biden with that. Like,
Here's the
what
thing,
are you?
though. Here's the thing, though. In the primary, the Democrats were spineless. None of them had a spine to go after him on that. Even Tulsi Gabbard, I'll throw in there and say she never really brought any of that up.
I think
And
she
I
was.
don't know why the Democrats are so spineless. I really don't know.
They are. You know why? Because I think a lot of them they wanted Biden to be the man, to be their man. So they knew that if they were going to attack him, Bernie's going to surge up, right? They didn't want that to happen. So they are willing to just look the other way. I mean, this guy doesn't remember where he is. He's
Right.
confusing his wife with his sister. I mean, he is really
He's
going
out of it. He's missing right now when the crisis is happening. Nobody knows where he's at.
screws loose. And I must say, at his age, I'm actually very scared that he could even catch something. I want him to get tested because I know
Yeah.
Trump looks fit as a fiddle. I
Yeah.
don't
Well,
see
there's
Biden
worries
and
with Trump too because Trump was at CPAC and he
no,
was
but
at all these
Trump looks
places.
guy. I mean, does he look like someone with a flu? I mean, you have to look at constitution and immunity. If your immunity is
So
very
you
strong,
take Biden for more of a vulnerable candidate than
the guy can't remember what day it is. I mean, he's going cuckoo.
right.
No, honestly. Also, I mean, the creepy Joe stuff, like, come on, that
Yeah,
he's a creep,
he's in
man.
trouble.
Little
He's in trouble.
he's in trouble. So, as a proud, I guess, Indian American person, I would much rather see, and I hope and I want to see. Trump has been very. I think he's had a lot of Indian people in his cabinet. His chief of staff, Raj Shah, was,
Well,
someone.
some people say that he might let
Nikki
Pence. I was gonna say he might let Pence go for vice
Haley.
president and blame everything bad that happens on Pence, and throw Nikki Haley on the ticket as VP.
I No, I think Nikki Haley is going to be 2024, and I think she is going to be the first female president. I hope that's great for me because she's going to be the first Indian person, and I think
Yeah.
it's fantastic. And she's very pro-India, and she's very
Mm.
pro-Modi, and she's
Well,
stands for
I
all of.
have my issues with Nikki Haley, so I would be a critic. But I
But
would
she has
always encourage
as
people to run
well,
like that. Yeah,
and
she seems like she's got a good record.
she has a good record.
To
And
run.
I
I
think
don't know how good it is, but
at least she's not disingenuous like these people. And I just want to say, with Tulsi Gabbard, have you seen the way that these progressives have turned on her? They have completely, like a wolf, they've like just torn her apart the minute she sort of,
right,
and I
endorse
don't
Joe
even think
Biden.
it's not even an official endorsement, but whatever, she's
Mm.
supporting him. The They're not even thinking what her point of view on all of this is. She's a smart woman. She's not going to go down with a sinking ship,
Well, there's
you
three
know?
things that I want to say about that. One is the coronavirus has basically ended the campaign. It's over. Bernie Sanders is not going to get 60% of every single vote coming up. It's over. He can't campaign. He can't hold any
Yeah.
rallies. Tulsi can't hold any more town halls, so she can't push her foreign policy agenda forward. So the coronavirus is a big one. The other big one is the fact that Bernie Sanders never extended a handout to Tulsi Gabbard during the
Right?
entire campaign
She
when
was
she stood up
even-
for him.
Yes, that's true. And
So
I know look, as a Hindu woman, I know she's all about dharma, and she's about integrity, and she's here to serve her country. For her,
right.
all I see with her is a service person, with a high level of integrity and very good judgment.
It
And
makes it the Democratic Party makes it impossible for good candidates to rise up, because
yes,
if you're not pure enough, the Puritan squad is going to go on Twitter and
and
shame you to death because
we
you actually this is the other thing, you lived up to a pledge that every single Democrat had to do in order to run, which was, I'm going to
that's right.
support the inevitable nominee. And guess
Yeah,
what? Joe Biden is the inevitable nominee. She even said in the speech, I don't agree with a lot of what Joe Biden says. I have a kinship with his son, Bo Biden,
yeah,
I believe, because of the National Guard and service to country. So that's admirable for someone to be
yeah,
able to cross party lines and acknowledge, hey, your son is worth something, and I served with him, and we're all humans, and we're all Americans in this. And what do the vulture leftists do? The Puritans, they come out of the shadows and bludgeon you to death on Twitter
no reason,
for
for no
following what
for
Joe.
stupid reason.
Right, and Bernie Sanders is going to do the exact same thing next week.
That's true. And she is much more pure than some of these other jokers, but she's smart. She has a long career ahead of her. I think if she is smart, she's going to leave this damn party, either be independent, or if she has the balls to do it, she would actually go
Join
across
the
the aisle.
Republicans.
And I think they would like her. They love her. I think she
I don't
can.
know if she has that much in common with them.
No, but there's a lot of DNC stuff that also she didn't have. I mean, she disagreed with her own party on many levels as
Yeah.
well, right? So
And I
she's
think
kind
she's
of
also fond. She's fond of the up and coming, more, I would say, more moderate Republicans who
yeah,
are rising up in the
yeah.
ranks. Like a
And there's
Tucker Carlson is a little bit older, but he kind of set the way, right, for these new thinking Republicans who,
that's true.
yeah. I
I
don't know
see.
if you know Sagar from The Hill the Rising.
I
I don't
love
know
him.
what you
I
think of
mean,
him.
he's
Okay.
Indian. He's Indian. I'd love to have a conversation with him on his views
Yeah.
about.
I give him credit a lot because he's in that new model of Republican, you
Yeah,
know?
and I
So
like him more. I like him more than her because I think Sagar is fair. And also, even though he's from the right, he doesn't push his his agenda. He's very fair, but I
He's
think
very
from,
fair to progressives. He's very
yeah,
fond of progressives too.
all I hear on that show is just Bernie, Bernie, Bernie. And
Yeah,
I
exactly.
think
So
that's what
I'm
you know.
glad. Yeah, it's gonna be nice to have a break there and hear them talk about other things.
Yes. And
So
I hope this is a lesson for the people, especially on the left, to stop this ridiculous identity politics that they play,
yeah,
stop this intersectional train that they're on. It doesn't do anyone any good. Respect people. They're all American citizens. Give them the decency and the respect for being patriotic and nationalistic.
yeah.
And why don't you think about the country as a whole and
Instead
lift
of
everyone,
pandering to one
work
group,
with
right?
everyone. Don't pick and choose favorites among minority groups, because this is a pool of heavily persecuted people, and you can't do that. When you pick and choose favorites among seemingly persecuted people, people will be hurt, they will be disrespected, they'll be offended on a very, very deep level that will be very hard to get rid of, and they
Yeah,
will take their vengeance with their vote on the
yeah,
ballot.
absolutely.
Happening,
Well, hopefully Tulsi Gabbard has a good
a
future ahead
future.
of her. I'll be following her campaign. And if you guys were, interested by what Preity had to say, why don't you tell them where you can find you, where they could find you on Twitter, on Instagram, and all of that.
Oh my God, I'm so excited. So on Facebook, I have a sort of a public figure page. It's just Preity Upala, PreityUpala. You'll find it. It's the one with it has, I think, 106,000 members. So it's the one with the bigger, because I have a personal page too, but go to the public figure page and connect with me. I have my own YouTube channel called, well, it's my name, but it's the Preity Experience. So please check
Yes.
me out. I have a ton of videos. And I have my own podcast called The Eternal Hour on iHeartRadio. On Twitter, it's at PreetyU. On Instagram, it's also PreetyU. And if you just Google Preity Upala and articles or journalist, you will get hundreds and hundreds of my articles that I've written and video interviews that I've done for a ton of outlets all around the world. So please just Google that and you can find all the my material and my viewpoints and what I've said, and just reach out. I love to hear from people, and even on this video on the comment section or whatever, just reach out, because I am really looking to engage, and I nothing gives me more of a thrill than engaging with people and connecting with them and just sharing and just, hey, it's all love and
There you
light. We
go.
are one big family in the end anyway.
Right, a perfectly good note to end on. So, thank you guys so much for watching, and you can find that link to Pretty's YouTube page in the description below. Thank you so much. Hold on 1 second as I end this live stream. Thank you guys again, and hope everybody has a nice day. Bye.
Namaste.